This is a story called Banquet Table by Scare in a Box, under the subreddit Short Stories. He stepped out of the store, smiling down at the bag he now carried in his hand. The antiquarian had been quite odd about the whole experience, asking him multiple times if he was sure this was what he wanted. It seemed a little absurd to him, but the man was quite weird in his appearance and behavior, so he decided there was something wrong about the man, and not the object he had purchased. He had always been into purchasing antiques, mostly for decorating his own home, but sometimes for gifting to friends and family. He prided himself on finding rare objects that worked well for his home, and this set of bookends would work marvelously for the shelf on top of his TV, as soon as he unwound the weird rope tied tightly around them. He was excited to show his wife. She was always so into seeing his purchases, and knew she would love this. This was his first time ever seeing this antique store. He didn't frequent the area very often, but had to drive an hour away from home for a doctor's appointment, and couldn't help but shop around. The store itself seemed to pop out of nowhere, so different from the broken-down street around it. It was colorful on the outside, and had a charm to it that he couldn't quite put his finger on. The inside was filled from floor to ceiling with all sorts of gadgets and goodies he'd never seen before. It was like stepping into another planet. He knew he would be back again another day to shop around once more. He was shocked he was able to resist buying even more. For now, the bookends were enough. He was beyond excited when he arrived home. He wanted to set it up immediately, and make sure it was in fact perfect for the space. He tried fishing it out of the bag, but stopped when he realized there was a piece of paper inside, which he hadn't noticed the seller put in when he was purchasing the item. He pulled it out and saw a thicker piece of paper with printed words on both sides. The top read, "Quick Start Guide," in a papyrus font, and he chuckled to himself at once. It was a set of bookends. Why would it need a quick start guide? He set the bag on the table and sat on the couch to read the piece of paper. The text itself was pretty ominous and read, "The two parts don't like to stay close. That's why they are tied together. Keep them this way for your own safety." He burst out laughing. This must have been a way for the antiquarian to add some humor to his goods. He wondered if he also had funny jokes about the other things he sold. It definitely added to the mystique of him asking multiple times about whether or not he really wanted to purchase the product. He set the piece of paper down and finally pulled out the bookends. It was a set of black obsidian blocks, perfectly shaped so the curves of both sides would fit together. Half of the blocks were made out of a thick maple, and it was clear the maker of the bookends was quite skilled in his craft, and he was able to match the curve of the wood perfectly to the obsidian itself. There was a thick piece of coarse rope wrapped around it, which in his opinion really ruined the smooth curving of the pieces. He set the pieces down onto his dining room table and proceeded to cut the rope open with a pair of scissors. He tried grinding against the thick rope, but it seemed the scissors were not sharp enough for something so thick. Disgruntled, he walked to his kitchen, grabbed the sharpest knife he could, and walked back to slice the rope. It went quickly this time, so quickly that he could barely fathom everything that happened within the next few seconds. The two parts of the bookends were suddenly a meter away from each other. It must have happened instantly, so quickly his eyes weren't able to see it, though he could feel them push his hands apart. Not only that, his table was also larger, like it was stretched apart in the room. He couldn't believe it. He blinked a few times, trying to make sure he wasn't imagining things. Maybe it was time to read the rest of the manual. He flipped the piece of paper on its back, with the words "Full Manual" on the top, also in papyrus. If not tied together, the two parts will try to increase their distance from each other by stretching the very fabric of space. The first stretch will be small, but the second will be brutal, a distance so large that space itself will not be able to contain it. He dropped the guide, shaking a little. But it was too late. The two pieces had already moved even further from one another. He could only see one end of the sculpture now. It was on the table, sitting inconspicuously, like it wasn't some sort of magical artifact. The table itself stretched so far he couldn't see the end of it. He didn't even know if there was an end. In fact, he couldn't see the other end of the room he was in. He knew at once he should have listened to the salesman. He didn't know if he'd be able to get out of the room. The door itself was nowhere to be found. He would have to drive right back to the antique store and give the owner a piece of his mind, and maybe see if they had other magical artifacts that he could play with. Well, his wife had always complained about their dining room table being too small for hosting Thanksgivings. At least they would have enough space now.